Hello, this is Mrs. Standridge. I'm here today to read another chapter of Elijah of Buxton. I hope you enjoy it. Chapter 18, Kidnapped. I don't know how long I stayed curled up in a ball on the ground before I started hearing Mr. Leroy over top of me. He was gasping loud whilst he waited for his breathing to catch a hold of him so's he could do a proper job of chopping me up. I thought about getting up and running again, but my legs were so tired and shaky that they weren't going to do nothing but lay there hoping it weren't them he'd hit first. Mr. Leroy got a hold of his breathing and said, "Boy, has you lost your natural mind?" Peculiar thing was that even though he was having a powerful hard time talking, he didn't sound at all like hisself. He sounded a whole lot like Pa. Instead of cleaving me like firewood, he said, "Now get up." It was Pa. Pa kept fighting to breathe regular and said, "All I need, you taking leave of your senses at a time like this. When you gonna stop this running nonsense and stand up to what's in front of you?" I said, "But Pa, he was gonna kill me." He said, "What? Why on earth would Leroy want to kill you? He knowed it was 'cause of me all this happened. It's all my fault. I told him the preacher warn't no thief." Pa said, "Hush that foolishness. This ain't none of your fault. This ain't no one's fault. Leroy wanted his family so bad that he warn't thinking clear. You could have said nothing to change him one way or the other. Let this be a lesson to you. You can't let your wantings blind you to what's the truth. You always got to look at things the way they is, not the way you wish 'em to be." I knowed what Pa was doing. Since him and Ma still think I'm so doggone fragile, they always looking out for me, always trying to make it so I don't feel bad about something. But after a while, you're old enough and you got to own up to what you did, right or wrong, and couldn't no one tell me that all this horribleness didn't start with me. Pa said, "Come on, we got to get back to the settlement. I'm a call a meeting so's we can do something about catching that yellow-bellied dog of a blame thief." I knowed better than to say anything more. Pa don't swear much, and when he does, it's a sign that all talking from me is supposed to be through. Pa said, "You near about caused my heart to jump clean out my chest with all that running. You tearing off in one direction and Leroy tearing off in the other. I was too old to be chasing after folks like a hound dog. Let me sit a minute so's I can get my wind." Once Pa's breathing catched up to him good, we headed back. I was sore disappointed in myself. Not for running off like I did. That only made good sense. Ain't nothing fragile about running when you think you're about to get axed by someone as strong as Mr. Leroy. No, I was shamed 'cause of how far I'd got. I reckon I must have covered 2-3 miles, but once me and Pa got walking toward the road, I saw I hadn't gone no more than 200-300 feet. This was mighty puzzling, but the only thing I could figure was I must have done a lot of running round in circles, which would probably be why Pa caught me so easy. Pa and the other elders called a meeting in the church for that night. Me and Emma Collins and Sidney and Johnny had to run through the settlement to let folks know. Most people had heard what happened and said they'd be there. About an hour before the meeting was supposed to commence, I finished my supper and walked on to the stoop and heard Ma say to Pa, "Then what we going to do with Elijah?" I said, "Pardon me for interrupting, Ma, but what you mean, do with me?" Ma said, "I don't want you coming to this meeting, Elijah. Folks likely going to be talking a lot of bad things, and it ain't right for no child young as you to be hearing all that nonsense. Especially since you's just a—" I know it ain't right, but I butted in on Ma afore she had a chance to get her words out about me being a fragile boy. I said, "But Ma, I can't miss this. Maybe they're going to need my help with something." Ma and Pa looked at one another, and Pa said, "Well, if they do, we gonna be sure to let you know about it." Ma said, "Is Mrs. Bixby gonna come to the meeting?" Ma knowed most times Cooter's ma didn't come out of their home. Cooter's grandma was near about 50 years old and frail and ailing, and Mrs. Bixby was afeard of leaving her for even a minute. I said, "No, ma'am, Mrs. Bixby said her ma warn't getting on too good, and she was going to stay with her." Ma said, "All right then, I want you to run on over there and ask if it be all right for her to look after you whilst we's at the meeting." "But Ma," Ma held up her hand to show there warn't no more to say. Then she told me, "And you might as well ax if you can sleep there tonight and go to school with Cooter tomorrow, 'cause ain't no telling when this here meeting's gonna break up, and you know how you is if you don't get your sleep." She was making it sound like I was a baby in a crib. I said, "But Ma." Pa said, "Don't be back talking your ma, Elijah. Go get your school clothes so you can go tomorrow morning with Cooter." "Yes, sir." Grown folks sure never want to give no one the respect they're supposed to get. Here I'd been working hard on not being fragile, and Ma and Pa hadn't even took no notice of it. I went and got my clothes for school the next day and put 'em in a tote sack along with my school shoes and school books. Fair's fair, and it weren't the littlest bit fair that I was going to be cut from all the deciding what to do about this mess I caused. Whilst I was toting my clothes and such to Cooter's, I started thinking on what was going to happen at the meeting tonight. I didn't know if they were going to put a search party together for Mr. Leroy, or if they were going to even try to get a posse up that would go to America and try to run the preacher down. Whatever it was they came up with, I knowed it warn't fair that I wouldn't get to know till tomorrow after I finished my chores at the barn. That warn't going to be till after 8 in the evening, and it just didn't seem right that the person that caused all this woe had to let other folks clean up behind him. It warn't till I was just up the road from Cooter and them's house that another great idea started coming to me. By the time I knocked at Cooter's, the idea was set in my head. Mrs. Bixby answered the door. She said, "Good evening, Elijah. How you doing?" "Good evening, Mrs. Bixby. I'm doing good, ma'am. How are you?" "Just fine as can be." She pointed at my bag and said, "You running away from home, Elijah?" "No, ma'am, Mrs. Bixby. Ma and Pa were wondering if it's all right if I stay with you tonight, 'cause that meeting might go on till tomorrow." Mrs. Bixby said, "Elijah, you tell your ma any time she need me to look after her baby, she don't even got to ax." Doggone it all, didn't no one say nothing about no baby? Seems to me ain't no one over the age of 5 needs to be called a baby. Seems to me even the most fragilest child in the world wouldn't be called a baby once he's darn near 12 years old. I was about this close to giving Cooter's ma some back talk, but instead I said, "Thank you, ma'am." Then I sneaked in the lie I had to tell. "Ma wants me to walk on over to the church for about an hour so I can help decide what we're going to do about this trouble. Can Cooter walk over with me?" I figured me and Cooter would both get to eavesdrop on the grown folks' meeting. "That's fine, Elijah, but don't be counting on Cooter to go with you. Schoolteacher Travis just come by and said the boy's acting the dunce at school again." She opened the screen door, and I saw Cooter standing in a corner with his nose mashed up against the walls. She said, "Boy been standing in that corner so much these past few years he done wore a spot out in the floorboards." I said, "Yes, ma'am, and now Mr. Leroy's run off and ain't round to fix it neither." Mrs. Bixby raised an eyebrow to let me know she was wondering if I was being smart-mouthed. I said real fast, "I didn't mean no disrespect, ma'am." "None taken. Here, Elijah, drink this. Your friend ain't getting nothing to eat nor drink till he learn to act right in school, and I hate seeing this glass of milk go to waste." I drunk Cooter's milk. Then Mrs. Bixby made me drink 2 more glasses of it till there warn't none left. She said, "Carry your bag to Cooter's room, Elijah, and don't be trying to talk to that dunce neither. Another thing he gonna be doing till he turn 30 is keeping his mouth shut." "Yes, ma'am." I ran my bag back to Cooter's room and told Mrs. Bixby, "I'm going to go back home and tell Ma you said it was fine for me to stay here tonight. Then I'm going to go to that meeting for a while." She said, "You be careful and hurry back. I hear Leroy done lost his mind and is wandering about. Here he done throwed one axe 100 feet up into a tree, and throwed the next one so high it poked the man in the moon in the eye. Yes, ma'am, I won't be long. I weren't going to spend 1 minute thinking Mr. Leroy was going to hurt no one. I knowed him better than that. There weren't nothing but some more gossip and story pretty-upping. I figure I was going to have about an hour to eavesdrop on the meeting afore I had to get back to Cooter's house. I walked toward the church, but went into the woods so I could come at it from the back and no one could see me eavesdropping. It was peculiar to see the church all lit up from candles on a Thursday night. Most times it didn't look like this unless it was Sunday evening, or unless there was a service for someone that had gone and died. It was also mighty peculiar because there weren't none of the regular church sounds coming out of the place. There weren't no foot stamping, nor no hand clapping, nor no tambourine shaking to make you happy. There weren't even none of the choir singing to make the place seem so warm and comforted and cozy that afore you knowed it, some grown person was digging their elbow in your ribs to wake you up. But I knowed why the church was so different tonight, and it weren't 'cause of the full moon neither. Tonight folks weren't interested in nothing but straightening out my mess. There were only a few folks there already. They were keeping their voices low inside the church, and only once in a while could I understand somebody shouting out, "Yes, sir," or "Lord Almighty." Those were interesting things to hear, but what was more important was hearing what had made folks call out so. If I was going to eavesdrop proper, I'd have to crawl right under the church's floorboards. I remembered what Pa said about people that used to be slaves, and how they never let a chance at being late get by 'em. So I knowed I was going to have to wait out here for a while till the church filled up and all the stragglers had made it in. I was this close to being out of the tree line when I heard a twig snap behind me. I did what every fawn in the woods does whenever it gets come up on by surprise. I froze right where I was at. But it was too late. Before I could turn round to see what was sneaking up on me, a rough hand came across my face from behind, and I was getting squozed round the middle, lifted off my feet, and toted back into the woods. I'd seen how when a mouse gets grabbed up by a cat, it won't fight or twitch or do nothing to try to get away. I'd seen that and never could get in my head why it happened. I used to think if it was me that got snatched like that, I'd fight and kick and make that cat earn eating me up. I always used to say that I weren't going to go down that cat's throat without a fight, without at least getting me some good bites in on his tongue as I was getting swallowed. But I could see now that I was wrong, 'cause once this haint or this killer or this kidnapper or this slaver or this demon that had grabbed me lifted me up in the air light as a piece of straw and pulled me deeper into the woods, I knowed there warn't no sense in fighting or nothing. I was feeling just what that mouse must have been feeling. I didn't want to drag things out none by tussling. I just wished this getting killed would be over quick. Okay. So it sounds like Elijah has gotten into a bit of trouble. But that's the end of chapter 18. I hope you can join me tomorrow and we'll find out what happens to Elijah next. Have a good afternoon.